Caution.
All doctors to the ER.
Do these guys have any idea what they are talking about?
Get squared away.
Spiritual.
Get squared away.
Emotional.
Get squared away.
Mental.
Get squared away.
Physical.
The podcast that'll help you get squared away.
All right, everybody, we're back with another episode of the Squared Away podcast, where we try to help you get squared away. And today we brought in Sheila Carroll, which Sheila is a pediatric doctor. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
And why don't you just basically tell us what you do, Sheila? Tell us how you got into this game. I listened to a few podcasts with you on, and I'm super excited because we go so dorky deep into this nutrition and fitness game that we it's great to have people on that can kind of bring the science behind it too.
Well, thanks for having me, first of all. I am a board-certified pediatrician. I've been practicing clinical medicine for about 23 years now. I'm also board-certified in obesity medicine. I'm a life and weight coach as well. My greatest qualification is I'm a mom. That's my claim to fame. But so right now I have transitioned away from like traditional clinical medicine, and I'm really working as a coach, a life and weight coach, to help parents of kids who are struggling with extra weight, carrying extra weight, help the parents, number one, figure out what they want to do for their family, create the lifestyle that their family wants. So figure out what to do and then actually how to do it. And so I work with the parents, which the trickle-down effect is to benefit the health and the well-being of the child.
Yeah, it seems like so much of what's happening with kids today comes from what they're learning in the household. So I want to get into that eventually. But first off, what got you interested? How'd you get into medicine?
Well, I got into medicine. My dad is a doctor, is the honest truth. I was kind of at a crossroads after college. What should I do? I went to a liberal arts college and I played sports. So I think I kind of wasn't the greatest student in college that I could have been. I was more interested in athletics at that time. But my dad is a doctor, and he really said, you should consider med school and being a doctor, because for him, he found so much deep personal satisfaction in helping people. And he said it's just such a wonderful way to spend your life. He said that it's so awesome to be involved in the science and the human factor too. So I followed his advice, went to med school. He's an adult doctor. He's retired now. But I became a pediatrician because I've always loved kids. I love helping kids. And I got into this, I got into the coaching. I became introduced to coaching through my own weight loss journey. I was an overweight kid myself, and I've struggled with my weight, I would say, my whole life up until the past few years. I started being overweight when I was 9 or 10, and up and down, kind of, gain weight, lose weight, gain weight, lose weight. But it was always just on my mind constantly it took up so much of my brain space for so many years of my life. So when I got introduced to coaching a few years ago, and I really figured out this is like the missing piece of what I needed. And so if I needed it, other people must need it, to really understand why I was eating what I was eating, why I was doing what I was doing, and also why I wasn't doing what I kind of really knew I wanted to be doing. So anyways, and so to translate that into how to help kids, because I still feel so drawn to helping kids, the coaching, we'll talk about it, I'm sure, but coaching is takes a lot of thinking, and it's, uses this meta skill of being able to think about your thinking. Now that's a pretty advanced skill for a child, especially like an 8, 9, 10-year-old child, but as you age, kids can do that, but it really requires the part of our brain called the prefrontal cortex, which we know is not fully developed in humans until their mid 20s. So asking a child to try to make sustainable changes by themselves is, well, it wasn't going very well. It wasn't working. So I was talking to all of these kids, and they want to do the right things for themselves, and but when you're faced with, like, even my son who's 11, he's faced with, if he has a few dollars in his pocket and he's at the snack shack or whatever, he can't really think, oh, future Theo, his name's Theo. Future Theo would be really happy if I chose water instead of this Gatorade or whatever. He's just like, nope, I'm having the Gatorade. Of course I am, and that's normal. That's normal for our kids. So as parents, we need to understand that and kind of, take over some of that thinking for them.
I remember watching, I can't remember what her name was, but she had a TED talk about the prefrontal cortex, and her whole thing with parents was just keep them alive till they're 25. I took that a step further, and it was alive, no babies, no felonies till you're 25, right? So at least no unchangeable, decisions before 25 when your prefrontal cortex is finally developed. But I'll tell you, everybody that listens to this knows my story, but you don't necessarily. I was extremely overweight. I went from one summer living with my grandma and grandpa while my dad was working and my parents were separated. And I went from slim jeans to husky jeans in one. I just jumped right over the normal size jeans in one summer, and then struggled with my weight my entire life. And it's funny because we talk about males and their prefrontal cortex finally developing around 27, and that's when I got my shit together. 27 is legitimately when I started, and I went from 265 pounds in the size 42 pants down to 200 pounds with a lot more muscle, 210 pounds with a lot more muscle, and size 34 pants. So
Wow.
but for me, then looking back, it had nothing to do with the health implications. But now when I look at it, just the longevity and the health with everything that's happening with my family and everything, that's now what's more important to me than any of it. But I can't imagine um, trying to make the changes that I made at 27 at 12 or 10.
Yeah.
So
You can't by yourself. Yeah.
how do you help these parents? Like, what do you go through with these parents to actually try to make some significant changes in these kids' lives?
So first of all, I think exactly what you're saying, focusing on the health aspect of things and not the weight. The weight is kind of just a marker of some lifestyle habits that could be improved, especially for kids. Kids gain weight mainly because of the food choices that they're making. No, yeah. So I help parents. I work individually with parents, so we figure out what is going on and what their lifestyle actually is and what could be the problems. It just depends on the age of the child too. So if your parents have a younger child, a school age child, you're gonna have a different approach than if you're the parent of a teenager. But basically, my approach is with the parents, provide them some education, nutritional education. you know as you guys probably already know, the whole calories in, calories out, move more, eat less, like that doesn't work very well for anybody. And that's kind of the reason we're having the problem that we're having in well, all over the world today. Because we've told people, and honestly, that's the medical training. That's the training I got. And that's the training a lot of doctors are still getting. So there's a whole subset of a whole different group of doctors that are trying to change that. But even amongst all the doctors, there's different opinions about why people gain weight, and the science of weight loss. So for me, what worked for me and what I see working for my clients and their families and my patients is understanding the hormonal response to certain foods. And so what's happening to our kids today is there's the processed food world that we're living in, this environment that we're all swimming in has so many foods with added sugars, not to mention all the other chemicals and additives and things like that. But and the added sugar is what's causing the insulin to go up. And insulin is a fat storage hormone. So insulin, having high insulin levels is what's driving weight gain today in most kids, in my opinion. So what parents can do and kids can do if they learn that. So there's a couple of things. It's kind of like understanding why we love sugar, you know, instead of just saying we shouldn't eat that, it's bad for us, but if we really can understand and help our kids understand that the human body evolved over the millions and millions of years, we've evolved in part because we love sugar. We found sweet things, it used to be berries or, fruit that would just be in season when people were hundreds of years ago. And so our brains are wired to understand that that's good for us. That helps keep you alive. But what's happening today is that sugar has been so concentrated and so intensified. Our bodies have not kept up evolutionarily with how to process that much sugar. So, parents, I think that that's an educational thing that a lot of parents kind of find eye-opening. And then when you really do a little bit of understanding of how much sugar your child's actually eating every day, or how much sugar you're actually eating, I would start with yourself first, and if you're over 2 years old, the recommendation is to have 24 grams of sugar a day, which adds up pretty quickly if you're like my son, sometimes gets school breakfast or school lunch. He came home with the teeniest little package of dried cranberries that had 26 grams of added sugar in that tiny little package. So more than a whole day's worth of added sugar in one thing. But it's in ketchup, spaghetti sauce, barbecue sauce. Added sugar is everywhere. So I work with them. Back to answering your question. Mm-hmm. I work with the parents to, kind of get the education that you need and the understanding of why we love these things. Because I think that helps bring some compassion to your child. Of course he loves. I just say to myself all the time, of course my son wants to drink that or eat that. Of course, and then work with the parents to figure out what lifestyle, because it's more than just food. It's about how much we sleep. It's about movement. And it's also about, for kids and parents, but, emotional wellness, emotional regulation, learning to tolerate or, negative feelings, and avoid emotional eating, things like that. So we work on all of the things that, once the parents learn all of those things, then they can, over time, as their child developmentally ages, gets older and older, they'll be like dripping content, adding, just teaching them these things that the child can step into. Because what our goal is eventually is to have the child be intrinsically motivated. Oh, I wanna go out and move my body every day. I want to go to bed on time. I want to eat healthy foods because I feel good. I feel good in my body doing that. So that's the goal, is to kind of like get the parents so on board that their child is motivated when the time comes. Their child is motivated by intrinsically, not just you have to eat that, you can't eat that. Yes, for sure. For sure. Yeah. Because I needed that myself. I wasn't, until a few years ago, I needed coaching. I still need coaching. Coaching is so, powerful for everybody. But yes, parents need the coaching and the support and the skills. Um, we all do. And because what we're talking about is a way of approaching nutrition and approaching all these healthy habits, um, in a little bit of a different way than kind of than we're used to. Instead of just, you should do that, you're supposed to do that, this is the recommendation, and this is what us doctors do all the time. Here's what I'm telling you to do. Go, walk 30 minutes a day. Okay. Well, then how does my patient, say if I have an adult patient, how does my patient actually get themselves to do that when they haven't done that before? They're just not going to be like, oh, having your doctor tell you to do something, it's not that inspiring for that long. You know what I mean? Like that, this is why it's really not working. But when you spend time, if that patient had coaching and spent time, like, all right, well, let's look at, why aren't you walking in the first place? What thoughts are you having that are, creating the feeling that's ambivalent about walking, or even negative about walking, and so you're not walking. So that's what's so powerful, because we can change our thoughts about things. But you need to understand that you have to first become aware of what you're thinking that's creating your current result.
I think, go ahead, Martin.
Well, mainly because medicine's really changing right now. And after 23 years, I was feeling a little stagnant, and personally stagnant, and a little bit stuck. I also, in the 3 or 4 years before leaving, I became so like, I got introduced to the coaching, and I'm like, oh, this is what people need. I feel like this is what's so powerful, because I think this can help not just with weight, but with so many things in our lives. So while I was getting a little bit, no, I wouldn't say bored, but, kind of 23 years of doing the same thing. And then I became excited about this. And so it just was like a transition, my interest was fading in one thing and improving in the other thing, so to speak.
So this leads into another question is, so what do you think about what's going on right now, where they're trying to say, well, obesity is a disease, and they want to treat it as a disease?
Yeah, I know. That is such an interesting. I just became certified in last year in obesity medicine, and that is kind of the science, the science of obesity medicine, but from the people who are running that test, or running, kind of offering that certificate. It is through, it's called the American Board of Obesity Medicine. It's science, it's nutrition, it's medications, and it's surgery. So, and they say obesity is a disease. And I went to a pediatric bariatric surgeries are the weight loss surgeries, gastric sleeve, or there are several other weight loss surgeries, which now they're offering to kids as young as 13 years old. So that's a big change. But I went to this conference, and one of the doctors said, obesity is a disease that has no cure. And I was like, what? Because I understand. So part of naming it a disease is to get more funding. So it's very political, and I don't even understand all of that kind of thing. But if you can get something named a disease, you can get more money to either study it or whatever. I think another intention of naming it a disease is it takes a little bit of the shame and burden off of people who are carrying extra weight or are suffering with obesity, oh, it's a disease. It's not my fault, which I think is such a great idea, because it's not it. Yes, there's personal responsibility, but the thing that happens is once you start gaining weight, I used to think, but now I realize your adipose tissue or your fat, it's metabolically active. So it's not just fat that sits there on your body. It's actually sending signals to your brain and making you hungrier. So in that respect, once you start gaining, your body wants to gain more. And so you could look at it like, well, that's kind of a disease. But the honest truth is, I don't know what to think of that whole obesity as a disease. I don't know exactly. I'm not sure that's helping us. I don't know. Yeah, it's so nobody knows. It's genetics, it's lifestyle, it's we know too, like for example, prenatally, there's something called epigenetics, which is you know, um, the gene expression, not the actual DNA, but the how your genes are expressed as a baby and a child and an adult, is affected by the conditions in which you were living when you were in utero. So the
Yep.
pregnant woman, that how she was eating or not eating. For example, there's a study called the Dutch hunger study, which was around World War II, and when the people in the Netherlands were, I think, blockaded from food. So there were a lot of women who were pregnant but were undernourished, starving, really, in the first 12 weeks of their pregnancy. So they tracked those babies. Those babies went on to be a lot of those babies went on to be overweight in a higher proportion than normal. And what they're saying is those babies that then became adults were more predisposed to be overweight because of genes that got turned on when they were 12, when the mom was 12 weeks pregnant, because she got no food. So the baby's brain was like, oh, we need to really, beef up our fat storage game, so to speak. and that contributed to easy weight gain for them for the rest of their lives. So I think obesity is so complicated, and that we don't exactly know. The other thing is some people are, for example, me, I'm one of 5 kids. I was overweight as a kid, but not every kid in my family was overweight, and we were all eating the same things, and we all have the same parents. I think I used food for emotional reasons at times. Very sensitive, I was labeled as a sensitive kid, and my sister wouldn't do that, and so it's complicated.
What I will interject with my base of knowledge as far as obesity being a disease is metabolic disorder is definitely a disease.
Yes.
And one of the things that we fail to understand is the insulin factor and its speed in which it is excreted to deal with different types of carbohydrates. And the way that I like to explain it to people is by comparing fire, because really that's fire is releasing energy from an organic matter, right? We're releasing the energy from a piece of paper, or we're releasing the energy from a piece of wood. And if you considered processed carbohydrates just like processed wood, because we process wood into paper, we process wood into cardboard, right? So if you compare a processed carbohydrate to a piece of cardboard, and you burn a piece of cardboard, that energy is pulled out of that piece of cardboard with fire extremely fast, and it's hot and it burns very quickly, and that energy is just excreted into the air. Now, if you were trying to do the same amount of energy, if you're trying to release that out of a non-processed piece of wood or just a piece of firewood, that wood will burn slow, it'll burn long, and that heat will not be as intense, but it'll be a much longer, more useful heat. Now, if you compare that to how our body is dealing with a processed carbohydrate versus a natural carbohydrate, so just the same 30 grams of carbohydrate in white bread, or the same 30 grams of carbohydrate in an apple or 2 apples or whatever it takes to equal out 30 grams of carbohydrates. When our body goes to pull that sugar, which is the energy source in carbohydrates, out of that processed white bread, it is going to spike our energy systems, and our body is extremely efficient and it doesn't want to waste any of that energy. So it goes to store it, and it stores it very quickly. And the way that our body stores energy is as fat. Now, that 30 grams of carbohydrates is, let's say, an arbitrary half hour is how long it takes our body to get it out. And that's not scientific in that number at all. But let's say it takes a half an hour to get that 30 carbohydrates, that energy out of that piece of bread. And it is not going to use that amount of energy in that time. It is going to spike the insulin up in our system, and our body is going to be like, okay, we're going to use some of this for activity, but the rest of it we're going to store. And this happens continuously. Versus that apple, let's say that apple takes 2 hours to get that same 30 grams worth of carbohydrates or energy out of that apple, because it has to process every individual cell to get the glucose out of it. And it has to deal with the fiber. The fiber slows down the digestion, and everything is slower. And that's like that piece of wood. And that piece of wood is going to release that energy, or that apple is going to release that energy much slower. So our body has to excrete less insulin spikes and more of a long, drawn out insulin curve. And that is the difference in how a processed carbohydrate works versus a natural carbohydrate. Now, if you take a child who has been eating processed carbohydrates for 15 years, not only do they spike insulin, all of their tissues have become insulin resistant, because they have elevated this insulin for so long, over so many years, that they don't take an arbitrary 10 units of insulin to deal with the same 30 grams of carbohydrates that, Joe does, who hasn't processed his food. They take 30 units of insulin to process these same carbohydrates. And when that happens, we're storing even more. So that is what metabolic disorder is your body is actually processing all of the food different than somebody that has not basically damaged their metabolism. So I would say that part of obesity is a disease. But where we need to then take the next step past that is, while it is a disease, you are still personally responsible to do the best with what you have. If you're 4'5", you can't say, well, I can't reach the stuff on the top shelf, so I'm never going to get anything off the top shelf. You fix the fucking problem and you figure out how to get stuff off the top shelf. You get a step ladder. Like, yes, you are at a disadvantage. Yes, if we want to call it a disease, it's a disease. But then the next step is, well, you're going to have to work a little different for what you want. And that is that's where our society today completely loses we're like, oh, everything. And this happens with intelligence. This happens with skin color. This happens with sex. This happens with physical health. We're like, yes, it's a disease. Yes, you are, you were born into this poverty area. Yes, this happened to you. And then we just stop. We never take that next step and go, but it's also your responsibility to try to get yourself out of that situation.
I agree. Yes, for sure. And that's that's the power. Then you realize, like, okay, I know you've read books by Gary Taubes, or Taubes. I don't even know how to pronounce his last name.
I always say Taubes. I don't know.
Yeah, great books, but I love his little phrase of happen to be a person who gains easily. Those of us who gain weight easily. That's a phrase he uses in several of his books. And I love that, because exactly what you're saying, if you realize you are a person who happens to gain easily, you don't have to just roll over and let that happen. You can just, okay, I'm 5'1", personally, like, there's nothing I can do about that. Okay, how can I, move on from, or, incorporate that into my life and keep going. And so I happen to be a person who gains easily. Okay, so what now? What can I do? So if I don't want to be carrying extra weight, what can I do? And take action from there.
And another thought after that is I even like to think of myself as I have an extremely sensitive gauge system. And
Yeah.
if I am being unhealthy, my body is going to tell me very quickly that I'm being unhealthy, which I would much rather have than a very faulty gauge system, like somebody who can eat whatever they want, whenever they want, give themselves atherosclerosis or coronary artery disease, elevate all of their hormones to a point that they're increasing their risk for cancer and all of these blood pressure issues and everything, but then they never see it on the outside
Because they're not overweight, right?
because they're not
Yeah.
overweight.
So I say that all the time, and I'm saying that in my little community where we live, just because your child isn't overweight, it doesn't matter. They still shouldn't be drinking all of Gatorade or, all of these things. They may not be overweight, but metabolically, these foods are not good for them. And that's a difficult message, I think, for parents who when they look at their child looks fine, But there's a thing called TOFI, thin on the outside, fat on the inside. And what they mean by that is like you're not storing subcutaneous fat, like the fat that you can pinch an inch or whatever, you might be storing fat viscerally, so in your organs. For example, that's what fatty liver is, and that happens to thinner kids because of the food choices that they're making. Yeah.
Now, when I talked to you earlier this week, I mentioned the Dorito effect. Have you ever
No,
read that
I
book?
have to read that. I haven't.
Okay, so and this one I have after reading this book, I have a theory about one of the reasons that we consume or we're driven to consume so much processed food, right? Because our evolution has made our bodies extremely intelligent. And we think that our bodies are so dumb, but our bodies are so extremely intelligent. And the Dorito effect talks about the effect of adding flavor to food without adding micronutrients
Mm,
and minerals and all of the stuff that comes in nature along with flavor. So if
mhm,
you have a bland, not ripe strawberry, that strawberry has much less nutrition in it than a bright red, ripe, beautiful, gorgeous organic strawberry. That strawberry has and we only know a certain amount of micronutrients that we can put letters on, right? Vitamin E, K2, all of these vitamins. We only know a certain they're discovering new vitamins every day. And so what this book goes into is how our bodies are drawn subconsciously to what we eat. And they went in and they talk about a study where they went into an orphanage in I think Africa, and they tested all these kids for malnourishments. And basically they're in an orphanage in Africa. They all have malnourishments. And so they document all these kids malnourishments. And then they basically build an open buffet of all these very odd foods that would be very, very heavy in one specific micronutrient, whether it be zinc or K2 or D or all these different nutrients. And they just watched these kids and wrote down what they veered towards. And
mhm,
what happened is these kids would initially excuse me, start to pick at all the foods until their brains learned what foods were so rich in whatever their micronutrient deficiency they had was, and then they would gorge on that food until assumably their micronutrient deficiency was solved, and then they would kind of just go back to picking. And so our
yeah.
what I wanted to get out there is our brain is so intelligent with what it needs,
Mm,
but it doesn't necessarily talk to us and say, hey, I need
mm,
vitamin D, right?
mm,
It just makes us subconsciously draw towards food.
yeah.
Now, we go then and we eat a Dorito or a Cheeto or whatever you want to, whatever, insert any processed food you love, right? And we get 300 calories and no or very little nutrition. And then our body says, all right, I understand that was food, but I didn't get enough of the nutrition. Give me more.
Mhm.
And I understand that was food, but I didn't get enough of the nutrition. Give me more.
Mhm.
And so we're drawn to eat 1,000 or 1,500 calories in one sitting of this processed food. And I don't care if it's a Dorito or if it's your fucking keto ice cream that is 900 calories in a tub that you think is healthy. And I ate one of those this week, so that's why I thought about that. But you are like, if you sat down and tried to eat 1,000 calories of any non-processed food, good luck.
Yeah.
Good luck sitting down trying to eat 1,000 calories of a sweet potato. It's not going to happen. Your body is going to get to a certain level and it just goes, you're done.
Yeah.
You're done. What are you doing?
Yeah.
And so we have this drive that, and the kids have it, especially, like, we have the kind of self-control where we can say, well, sometimes we have enough self-control that we can say, oh, I'm not going to eat any more of that. But if these little kids without the prefrontal cortex that don't necessarily have the self-control are able to just gorge on this non-nutritional, calorically dense processed food, their body is telling them more. And how do we expect them, if that's all that they know, or that's all they have in front of them, or even that's the possibility for them, how do we expect them to make the better choice?
Yeah, we can't. I mean, this is the whole thing. We can't expect them to even understand that.
So how do you
But parents can
how do you
understand that.
fix that?
Yeah. So it has to come from your parents or your grandparents or who's ever taken care of you. I think it could also come from teacher. It has to come from the adults. And as a society, we have to start valuing our health in a different over the money created by, sometimes I say to my son, like, why does Coca-Cola even exist? Why do we even allow Coca-Cola to exist? It's so damaging for people, and it doesn't add a single thing. Except it's a product to make money, but the harm it's creating is real, all over the world. Um, so the way what you're talking about is the kids can't do it themselves. They can't possibly understand that. That's complex. And but adults can understand it. And so then adults need to learn that, be open to that. We need to talk about it more. This is a thing, like, so many people, I don't think I really understood until, even as a doctor, until 10 or so years ago, like, how the problems of processed foods. I think sometimes the thought is like, well, it's easy. If they're selling it, it must be okay. And so I think it's just, there's so much going on in people's lives and people are so busy. And if they're not having a problem right there in that moment, it's one thing that slips a little bit, I think. It can. But trying to bring it to the forefront of people's attention as a preventative health too. Like, this is what we want for our kids. We don't ever want you to become so metabolically sick that that you're having trouble. We want to start to prevent that problem now. So that's why I think working with the parents is so powerful and the only way to help the kids.
Have you seen any of the studies that have shown that self-control is finite?
Well, if I put myself in a study of N of 1, then yeah, people say willpower is a muscle that fatigues pretty easily. So it's really, yeah, it depends on, are you tired? Are you know what I mean? Your mood. What else is going on in your life? Are you dehydrated? Like, your willpower, just trying to white knuckle through a diet or white knuckle your way to a sustainable change is not going to be successful for you.
So I think the way that they tested this, if I remember right, they had two groups of people that they came in, and one of them had this super simple arbitrary like test that they had them do, where it was like, what color is this? It's blue, right? And they went through this 100 questions. It was all really simple. And then they had, afterwards is where the actual study was going on. While they were asking them about the test, there was like snacks out on the table, and there was like donuts, cookies, and then fruit and vegetables, right? And they actually, measured the amount of the processed high carbohydrate food that group chose over the natural foods, and then they had another group that it was a very hard, like very mind intrusive or inclusive test, right? 100 questions of like, algorithms and all this type of stuff that really used your mind in a very a very difficult way, and they consume drastically more calories post that, and it was all processed calories, or a lot more processed calories. So then if we think about that, and we're like, well, what should I have for breakfast? I could have these donuts on the counter, or I could have this oatmeal, and then that's a choice, right? And then, like, I'm going to stop at the gas station, and I don't have any food in my lunch bag, so I'm going to have to go in and buy something. Am I going to go in and buy the pre-made cheeseburger and fries, or am I going to go in and buy a yogurt and a wrap or whatever, right? Like, all of these times, every time we have to make these decisions, it becomes less likely that we're going to make a good decision. So, like, I know we talk about it on here all the time, and I say I have to, like, engineer my decision making out of it. Like,
Exactly. Plan in advance. That's what I teach parents too, and I do for myself, because exactly what you're talking about. If you plan what you're going to have for dinner, for example, or pack for your child's lunch, or pack for your child's snacks, there's no decision when the time comes. Oh, I've planned, let me look at my list. Oh, I planned we're having chicken kebabs or whatever. So here's the thing. This is the trick though. When the time comes and you're like, oh, I'm supposed to have grilled chicken, your brain is probably going to be like, takeout pizza, or, and just being like, oh, I hear you, brain. I hear what you're offering me, but I already made this decision. I honor my own decisions. I have my own back, and I want the results of having the chicken. Thanks for the offer, or thanks for the suggestion to have this other food. And that's normal. So this is what we're contending with. Our human brains just trying to keep us alive. They're doing anything they can to keep us safe, keep us, happy. The motivational triad, what do they say? Like, seek pleasure, avoid pain, and exert as little effort as possible. That's what these brains of ours are trying to do. And in this modern food environment, that's why the suggestion is always, oh, you should eat that. You have chips in your whatever. We have to learn to realize, oh, that's normal for our human brains. Our human bodies didn't evolve. Even 50 years ago, we didn't have the food choices available then that we have now. And when we just listen to our brains unconsciously and do what they tell us to do, we're having a problem. This is the problem we're in.
I'm curious, after just thinking about what you just want, the dopamine connection, right? Because we're so overly dopamine dominated in our current society, and we see it with, like, teenage kids, especially teenage girls, like vaping, and dopamine is so lit up by processed foods. I'm curious as to what the long-term effects of our even more and more and more dopaminergic society is going to do.
Yeah, I think we're about to find that out over time. I don't think, what you're saying is, going back to your story when you were saying you find a berry, if you have a strawberry, that does give you some dopamine. That gives you a little bit of dopamine. So you have like a berry-sized effect dopamine. You have a handful of Doritos, that gives you a bigger dopamine release. So your brain is learning, like, oh, Doritos are, kind of better for me in a way. So dopamine's involved in pleasure, it gives us the pleasure, but also it's involved in the learning pathway. So when your brain is releasing dopamine in high levels, you're learning, like, oh, that's good for you, even though it's really bad for you, physically and metabolically. So that's what people need to be aware of and understand about their bodies and the human body, and how it is in 2023 compared to, how it used to be.
And dopamine is such a comparative hormone. If you're constantly at a 10, then that 10 becomes your normalcy. And if you're not at a 12, you're not feeling elevated or not feeling better than you were at a 10, versus if you're constantly living at a 2 and you have that berry that gives you, 5, that feels great. But if you're at a 10 all the time because of social media and everything else, and then you're like, the berry is like,
Yeah,
right? Like,
exactly. And this is why kids thinks, well, this is for me, like, why a lot of kids, I think, don't think fruits and vegetables taste good. They're like, we don't like that. He won't eat that. He doesn't like that. And I'm like, well, he doesn't like that because he's comparing it to what he expects, or what what he's used to eating. So his brain is not offering him that same reward for eating an apple as it is for eating the other foods. And kids interpret that as, I don't like it. But if you just dropped someone on a desert island with only whole unprocessed foods, they would learn to eat those and enjoy them. So the trick is, how do we kind of dial down the processed foods and dial up the unprocessed foods, and get kids on board with that. And it's just a constant education process for the parents to educate their child. This is what I'm constantly doing with my son. And
do you deal with preparation with the families at all, with food preparation? Like, are you a great cook?
well, I don't want to brag, but I do love to cook. And I'm lucky I have time, to cook. And although I make the time for it, it's sometimes I would be like, what I hate is cleaning up. Like, if I could have someone clean up for me, then I would be, but, yeah. And I think with very little minimal training, people could become eat good cooks, and so if a mom says to me, like, I'm just not a good cook, I'm terrible, then we just actually work on that thought, like, well, why do you think you're a bad cook? And you're just believing that about yourself. How about changing that thought? Like, I could be a good cook, or I want to be a good cook, or I'm going to work on being a good cook, so it just doesn't have to be the end of the road, like, I'm a bad cook or I don't like cooking. The thing is, like, if you think it's important enough, would you be willing to spend the time and the energy to, put into that to get the result that you want?
So what are like your guidelines for eating out then? So if you don't feel like cooking, it's a weekend, and then I got 11-year-old too, so you're gonna go out and you're gonna be bombarded by all these restaurants.
Yeah. And so I am at a place for myself where I know I know what I want to eat when I go out. Or if sometimes I don't even eat that much. If I could just eat at home and have a salad, or if we're going out, for myself, I never feel deprived that I can't have pizza. I don't even want to eat that, So, but for my son, it's different. And what I have chosen to do is, I don't want to control and micromanage every little aspect of his life, in that regard. So, I came across this phrase one time: we do what we do most of the time so we can go with the flow some of the time. So what that means to me is, like, mostly at home we're eating really well, or what I consider really well. And then if he goes out, he can eat what he wants, and I'm hoping over time he's going to be choosing, healthier foods. And, but I think we just have to educate and live with it. When your kids are younger, you can make food choices for them. And then as they get older, it's a little more challenging at times. He went to Chick-fil-A last night with a bunch of friends, so that was
the baked nuggets at Chick-fil-A are
Yeah, the baked
awesome. I'm
nuggets
not
are
gonna
good.
lie.
Yeah.
They're really good.
Well, it's so funny. Up here in Maine, we just got Chick-fil-A like a year ago.
Oh,
We
really?
never even had it here. So, or maybe we had one, but it was 300, 3 hours away from us. And so it's kind of a newish thing. But yeah, so he came home and he's like, I had a shake and fries. I was like,
Waffle fries, yeah.
yeah, waffle fries,
Ooh.
exactly. And he goes, it was so good. I'm like, okay.
You can't lie. I mean, he's not lying.
No,
It's
he's not
delicious.
lying, and it's okay. And it's
Yeah.
okay. And he's
Yeah.
11, and he is on his own journey. I think that is helpful, for us parents. Our kids are on their own journey. And so, as I think, he's spent enough time with me now that he knows, like, his choices give him a certain result, even like with school. You choose not to do your homework. Okay, we'll find out what happens. You'll find out what happens tomorrow at school with your teacher. But you only circle that back to what choice you made. So I'm trying to, circle. The other thing I think that's super helpful for parents to try to do is to get our kids um, tied into their bodies. So, like, how do you feel? He came home at like 9 something last night, so we didn't really have time to do this. But how do you? How does your body physically feel after having a shake, a Chick-fil-A sandwich, and Chick-fil-A fries? Like, so that I think is super important. Like, do you feel? I know it tasted good, but that's different than how your body actually feels. And so I think that that's really a powerful thing too. Like, can you notice any, you know, negative feeling or any not feeling that great after eating something like that? And if you start to pay attention to that, I think we can help our kids tune into their body signals.
And our kids pick up so much more than we even really recognize. Like, I know I have a 19-year-old, and as she was, growing up, and I went through this journey as she was growing up, and she doesn't necessarily act like she picked up any of it, but then you'll hear her, especially in her early teens, you'll overhear her telling someone stuff that you told her, and you're like, oh, you did actually realize what I said. Could you share, just, give us some of your success stories? Just share a few success stories with us.
Oh, sure. I've had so many wonderful clients that have changed themselves. They're changed how they're approaching, their child. And honestly, like, what I consider a huge success is the parent changing how they're feeling. And us parents, if you have a child with overweight, you're worried. Usually you're stressed, have all the feelings, maybe guilt, maybe shame, maybe, so we work on that, so then parents feel better. They can release some of that guilt, they can release some of that worry, and start approaching their child from a, clean space would be the coaching term, but from a, like a, a more self-compassionate approach. So I consider that a huge win, because exactly what you just said. Because when the parent is coming to the child from a place of, I accept you, I love you just as you are. I'm not trying to get you to change and lose weight so that you'll be better or more valuable or anything. And the parent accepts the child can feel that and see that. And honestly, it makes it easier for the child to change. So I've seen that in so many of my clients, and I love that. That's like a personal win for me. But I also, like, families just change, and they're like, oh, we've stopped bringing soda home. We've stopped doing this, and my child's growing and he's lengthening out, and I really don't focus on weight. So we don't, we don't talk about, oh, he's lost 5 pounds. We kind of just, I don't like to focus on weight, but just health. Oh, we're feeling better. He's moving around better. He's more willing to go out. His mood is better. She's happier. It's just, the success is really, the parent child bond, and the parent child relationship is improved. The parent feels better, and ultimately that trickles down to the child feeling better.
Do you have any, what's the best way to put this? Do you have any issues with the stigmatization of obesity and approaching kids without affecting their self-esteem? because it's already in an overweight child, it's already so ice thin,
Yeah.
likely.
And it's something that sometimes paralyzes parents because they don't know how to talk about it, and they worry about your child. We worry about our kids' self-esteem. So, a couple things, one thing is, well, first of all, if you don't ever approach the topic, then nothing is going to change, right? So the parent needs to be willing to do some work on that themselves first. And then if and when you ever decide to have an open discussion with your child about it, you can just completely leave weight out of that discussion and talk about health. Like, I don't talk about weight with my son. I talk about our health and our metabolic health and our little blood vessels and our liver, that kind of thing. And then it's not shameful. Everybody's got a liver. Everybody needs to protect their liver. And so if we can drop the the weight and the appearance thing and get that out. We're not doing this so that we look better. We're not doing this so we fit into a smaller size. We're doing it because we only have one body that needs to last. My dad is actually 90 now. He's 90 and a half. And so I say to my son, like, you are going to be as old as Papa or older someday. And this is the one body that you have. And we need to start protecting that right now. And we don't even talk about weight. And I think that helps with the stigma, because there's still so much. Overweight kids feel so bad. You get that message. It's still so prevalent. Books, movies, and the other, yeah. And if parents can just avoid adding to that in any way, I think that helps their child so much.
I think what you said right there about health over anything appearance related is by far the most important thing. And right when you said that, the light just dinged on in my head, like, oh yeah, if you go about it that way, you're not putting anyone on trial, you're not attacking anyone. There's nothing else going on there. We literally we want to be better, just like you want to get smarter and you want to get faster and you want to, grow in your life. We also
We
want to
do
get
it.
healthier.
We do it for our kids in so many other things, like, we do it for alcohol. We do it for, well, I'm not letting you drink because I don't think it's good for you. I don't want you to smoke because it's not healthy for you. I don't want you to eat this kind of food because it's not good for your body. And so we do it in so many other things. And if we just take that mindset of, let's approach this as a family, not, oh, you have a problem and we need to work on your problem. No, we have a problem. And you don't even have to couch it as a problem. I learned new information. I just learned that we should be eating this kind of food or more of this kind of food and less of this. We should be moving more. We should be sleeping more. And approaching it as a family is the best way for your child's mental health to stay intact during this whole thing.
I think if somebody goes out of their way to reach out to you and the hundreds of other people out there that are trying to do some growth in this space, they're already leaps and bounds in front of the average person dealing with this. But I think there's a big portion of our population that has the fixed mindset. Are you familiar with Carol Dweck and
Yeah,
the
for
growth and
sure.
fixed mindset?
Yeah.
And I think that's where things like this podcast come in, and you being on here, and hopefully the multitude of people that listen to this, and maybe if they don't have this issue, they might not even have kids, but they definitely know somebody that does, and they're able to send this out and just, hey, listen to this, just and maybe that sparks a little bit of ignition in that internal fire that's like, oh, like you said, I'm not a good cook. Well, that's a fixed mindset.
Hmm.
Like, no, you're not.
Hmm.
You don't know how to cook right now. Guess what?
Exactly.
If I asked you to play the guitar, unless you know how to play the guitar, you're not going to be very good at it. But could you learn? Yeah,
Hmm.
of course. And that's the growth mindset. And so why don't you give everybody here your contact information, because I'm sure that this is going to get sent out to a bunch of people that are looking for someone like you, or know someone that's looking for someone like you.
Sure. My contact information is I have a website, SheilaCarrollMD.com. Through that, you can contact me via my email, which is just SheilaCarrollMD.com. On that, I also have a free guide that's 10 simple steps to helping your child achieve a healthy weight. It's kind of lifestyle advice. It's sleep, movement, screen time, nutrition. So, the other thing the last thing you were saying that I wanted to add in for people is that I think sometimes parents feel it's going to be so hard, so painful, it's going to be miserable, and I'm not doing it, But I can tell you, it doesn't have to be that hard. It's not that painful, and that's a mindset thing too. Um, and and the other thing is, once you make a little change and you see the benefit of it, then it gives you a little bit of momentum. So sometimes I see people just stagnant because they're afraid to try. Number one, they don't want to fail. They don't want to feel bad. Um, but that's mindset stuff too that can be worked on, and it's just not as hard as people think it is.
I want to spell it out for everybody, because I'll put it in the podcast notes too. But it's SheilaCarrollMD.com. And do you have socials or anything where people
Oh
can
yeah,
follow what you're doing?
I'm on Instagram. I think it's at Sheila Carroll MD. And I have a Facebook business page, which I'm just starting to get to use. But you just email me, Sheila at SheilaCarrollMD.com. I'm happy to answer any personal questions people might, or individual help that people might be interested in. And I really just want parents to realize how powerful they can be for their child, and empower the parents to take some action, because if you don't help your child, then it's just going to get kicked. The can's going to get kicked down the road, or whatever expression that is.
I think it's something like that.
Yeah, something like that.
Martin, you got anything else?
Nope, I'm following right now.
Oh,
Excellent.
thanks.
So, no, good stuff. Really appreciate your time, and yeah, it's really insightful.
Oh, well, thanks. I appreciate you guys having me on, and all the work that you're doing too. It's
Excellent.
freeing, really, isn't it? When you really understand where your power is and the choices that you can make, and it sets you free. You don't have to live the life that you were previously living. And yeah, I just find it so powerful and freeing.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Thanks,
Thank you,
guys.
Sheila.